All right, everybody. As promised, I said I would talk a little bit about motivation for health and wellness. My exercise nutrition counselor that works with me in my Synergenics office, Annie Colbert, very bright lady, did her undergraduate work in exercise physiology and got a master's degree in human nutrition. Very fit lady, said she's watched all my videos, thought they were awesome, loved the exercise ones, particularly the high intensity interval training ones when I was exercising on the hill behind Cordova. And she said, boy, it'd be great if you could spend a little bit of time talking about motivation. And I think more or less she was talking about motivation to exercise. But I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation to lose weight. And I'm going to take it, this COVID experience is causing everybody to be more health conscious. It's clear that it's a disease that we could all ultimately end up getting eventually, and those that are compromised, a high percentage are having problems, right? And when you consider that, it creates a more proximate awareness of our own health that maybe a lot of people put on the back burner because they think that their deterioration is years away, but all of a sudden there's this disease that could just knock them right out. So in that regard, it's creating health awareness, so I'm happy about it. And I wanted to go back to this chart that I showed you because it shows you the underlying diseases that are associated with poor outcome, and it's the colors are by age. So if you're greater than 65 years old, almost 70% of those people that were hospitalized, okay, the hospitalization rate is 4.6 per 100,000, and 90% of hospitalized patients have a problem. If you're 65 or older, 70% have high blood pressure. A little over 50% cardiovascular disease, a little over 30% diabetes, full-blown diabetes, some lung disease coming in a little over 40%, and obesity is coming in at about 40%. Interestingly, though, if you're 18 to 49 years, obesity is the #1 risk factor. At greater than 60% of those that require hospitalization between these age groups are obese. Why do we see that obesity has less of an effect when you get older? This is kind of harsh reality, guys. I apologize, but obesity is a risk factor for not being alive. So we actually see a reduction in obesity. In late middle age is when we all tend to start getting obese as our hormones decline. But we tend to see a reduction in obesity, particularly in the elderly, and there's two reasons. One of the reasons why there's not as many obese people dying is because a lot of them already died, okay? Because it's a risk factor for dying. The second is obesity is measured typically in most medical terms, it's based on BMI, which is your body weight based on your body surface area. And the reality is that as we age, we lose muscle mass, so you have a decreased BMI, even though you may have increased fat, so it's a poor way to look at it. But anyways, we're going to concentrate on this because this is low-hanging fruit for a lot of people if we can get control of obesity. Okay? So, motivation. Well, let's look at me. This is my New Amsterdam genetic report. This is a test that looks at all 22,000 genes in my body. And this company's really cool because they keep up with stuff. But this is a concise report that shows me my major risks and, some basic things. And you see, not too bad, cancer, coronary heart, it didn't make anything. But you get down to diabetes and you see these. Susceptibility to insulin resistance, obesity, age at onset of, susceptibility to metabolic syndrome, which is high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, systemic inflammation, and insulin resistance or diabetes. So, I mean, susceptibility to that and risk of diabetes. So that made the big page, okay? Now, if we go into my actual portal where you can look at everything individually, it's kind of neat. I'm in the endocrine section now, and basically you can click on these and they go to the small bullet. A red square is bad. The more closed the blue circle is, the stronger the clinical evidence is. So if you click on these, you get a breakdown of some things like allele frequency. So I have a pretty rare gene, only 2.5% of the allele. So basically everybody's got 2 genes for each thing. So there's a 2.5% chance that for each of, one from your mom and one from your dad, that you got this. But so that's not very prevalent, right? It's fairly rare. I got 1 copy, that's good. You get down here to this obesity at any age, fairly rare allele, 8.5%. That means probably a little over 10% of us have 1 copy. What this does is it makes this hormone, ghrelin, that controls appetite, not work right, and I'm hungry more than normal. I get that. I believe I have that. You come down, they threw this into the susceptibility of metabolic syndrome because metabolic syndrome typically comes from obesity, okay? And that gives me an increased risk of that, same gene. But then I got some other nice ones here. Here's an 11.8% that increases my risk of type 2 diabetes. And then here's another one, susceptibility to insulin resistance, another allele at 15.2%. And then just some other various ones on diabetes. Okay, like if I get diabetes, I'll likely have the microvascular complications. That's where they start hacking off your feet, your toes first, and then eventually, below the knee, and then if it's real bad, above the knee. So not good stuff. Well, so I've got risk of obesity, and I'm not obese. I'm not at my ideal, I meet ideal body weight right now, but I'm not happy with where I am because I came off an Achilles tendon rupture, and I had 3 months of sedentary lifestyle, and I'm not where I normally would be, but I'm not technically obese right now. But how have I combated that? Well, there's 2 types of motivation, right? Intrinsic and extrinsic. I think I have a lot of intrinsic motivation. I jokingly say, I don't know that they've identified this gene, but I jokingly say I've got the vanity gene. I don't think I get really down. Not really down. I get disgusted with myself if I start to get heavy. And I've used that as a drive to exercise, and probably also as a drive to eat right for most of my life. Now, I think I also have always been health conscious. Even as a teenager, I ate more right than the average teenager, and I was an exerciser back then. So I've got a lot of intrinsic drive to exercise and to eat properly. And then, of course, wanting to be a good example to you guys is another drive that is extrinsic, okay? Well, assuming you're overweight or obese, you may be lacking some of that intrinsic drive, right? So, I need to create some extrinsic drive for you guys fighting obesity. And I'm going to try to do that now. And I was just trying to find a nice window that I could get rid of all the writing. Let's see. Here's what we'll do. Put that one up. But I'm going to give you some lights here. All right. So, anyways, motivation to lose weight. This time you can probably see this one. Motivation to lose weight. Obesity. Not a cosmetic problem. Beautiful country music singer Kelly Clarkson, I don't know, a year or 2 ago, she came out on a magazine and said how much happier she was that she was no longer fighting her tendency towards obesity. And they use this term fat shaming, and I would never want to shame anybody for being fat. In fact, I've had times when I've literally come to tears because I've seen another human being and I've started to have the empathy of what it must be like to be trapped in their body. And I'm so sad for them. I want to help them. Obviously, you have to pick and choose those battles, and I rarely get into them in an ER setting where somebody gives me the opening. They say something like, my problem is I'm fat, and then I drill down on them. And sometimes I grab those people, and I've had people walk up to me at the grocery store and say they saw me in the ER and now they lost 30 pounds because they listened to my brief 15, 20-minute ER dissertation. But I've literally come to tears over the sadness I feel for somebody who's obese. I would not fat shame anybody, but it is a shame if you're overweight, okay? Now, we'll just go ahead and talk real quick. I want to do some definitions, and then I'm going to talk about why it's a shame you're overweight. It's not a cosmetic problem. It leads to all of these things. Now, goal, ideal body weight. All right, what is ideal body weight? Well, this BMI that the World Health Organization uses, they say a BMI, and it's based on your body weight and your body surface area. A BMI of 18.5 to 25 is normal, 24.9. 25 to 30 is overweight. And by the way, I'm overweight right now, according to BMI, World Health Organization. I think one time in all the DEXAs I've done, did I squeak below 25 BMI, and I was at a body fat percentage of 6.9, I think, okay? So it's a crummy test because it doesn't take into account muscularity, and it does not correlate nearly as well with metabolic diseases as a simpler test that I'll share with you next. Anyways, 25 to 30, 30 to 35 is obese, greater than 40 is morbidly obese. Now, what's the other test? Waist to hip ratio. I just did mine, it was 0.8. Anything, a male greater than 0.9, you measure your waist, and you measure your hips, and you divide your waist by your hips. Your waist ought to be smaller than your hips. Now, women have bigger hips, so they get less leeway. They should be less than 0.85. Waist to hip ratio. That actually is a fairly easy test to do that has pretty reasonable correlation with metabolic diseases because it takes into account that fat around your gut, which is what makes you sick. Now, what's a really good way to talk about obesity or your body fat percentage? And our goal is less than 20 in a male and less than 15 to 25 in a female. You start getting down below 15 in females, endocrine issues start happening. And then what I think is the most sensitive test, something I can do in addition to total body fat percentage on a DEXA scan in my office, is visceral adipose tissue. And I like to see males less than 2 pounds, females less than 1 pound. That is the fat around your guts. That is this metabolically active fat that causes systemic inflammation, insulin resistance. It's the bad stuff. And I can measure that directly. And my last one was 0.29 pounds, which is pretty good. I've only seen one other male under 1 pound, so that's pretty good. Okay, so obesity leads to hypertension. Remember the graph. It's the most common comorbidity associated with being admitted to the hospital across all groups, okay? Do you know that for every 10 pounds of body fat that you lose, your blood pressure drops about 5 millimeters of mercury. Well proven scientific fact. So you lose 20 pounds, your blood pressure comes down 10. Also, keep in mind that your poor heart has to pump blood to that fat, and I think I've seen that there's a mile of capillaries in a pound of fat. A lot of extra work. Okay, so hypertension will be less if you lose weight. Insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, is associated with obesity. Okay, fat makes you insulin resistant. Systemic inflammation. There's a clear correlation, it's been well proven in scientific studies, that as visceral adipose tissue declines, systemic inflammatory markers decline. Now, if you guys have followed my Facebook wellness patient posts and read through chronic disease, or you're one of my patients, you know that there are 3 things that tend to lead to blood vessel disease, which kills about 60% of us, okay? Cardiovascular disease, we'll call it, okay? And obesity clearly leads to that. But it contributes, or how it leads to that, is through the 3 things that we basically just talked about. It's also, I didn't include it in here, but obesity tends to also be correlated with a poor lipid panel, a poor blood fat panel, more small LDL particles. So if you take small LDL particles, you coat them with sugar because you're insulin resistant, probably partially due to the fact that you're obese, because I think I've proven that you can maintain great insulin sensitivity and have really low average blood sugar even when you have bad genetics, because I got the bad genetics, and my last hemoglobin A1C, my average hemoglobin A1C is around 4.9 to 5, which is really low. And my fasting insulin levels are either undetectable or usually around 3, also really low. So proof of concept, it's not all genetic. There's a genetic component, but we can win. We cannot turn those genes on. Takes behavior. I'm trying to give you motivation to use that behavior. Anyways, so you take the small cholesterol particles, you coat them with sugar, you inflame the blood vessels, and you start creating cardiovascular disease, okay? So, obesity sort of is the root problem of all of that. And then the last thing that I want to motivate you as a reason to get rid of excess weight is that there are mechanical effects. You know, obesity is one of the primary drivers of sleep apnea, which is kind of a lung disease, which I'll guarantee you probably makes you more likely to have problems with COVID-19. I'm going to do a detailed sleep apnea talk soon. But it's also musculoskeletal derangements. Oh, the excess weight wears your joints out, needing to have joint replacements. So all these things, because you just keep kicking the can of being overweight or being obese down the road. It's tough, but you can win. If you don't believe me, go to the Wellness Patients page and read Aunt Pam's story. It's a long read. It's about my 4th or 5th post. It's amazing. She killed it. She had everything and she's got nothing, and she's at ideal body weight. Okay. I think that's what I wanted to talk about on that thing. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening here. Very simple concept. Energy stored, that's fat, equals energy in minus energy out. Energy out is your basic metabolic rate. That's how much your body uses in energy to be alive, doing nothing. Plus the energy of your normal everyday activities, plus energy from exercise, energy expended from exercise. Now, you should be aware that increased fitness, which if you exercise, you will become more fit. generally correlates with decreased obesity and other risk markers being less. So there's your motivation to exercise, right? It works. It helps improve energy out, which can make this energy stored less. Okay? Now, energy in, controlling EI. First of all, I want to talk about macronutrient timing. Okay, there are three major macronutrients: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Okay, I will tell you, Cliff Note version, carbs make you hungry, fats have a reasonable appetite suppressing capability, but they're calorically dense, 9 calories per gram. Carbs and proteins, 4 calories per gram. Proteins have the most appetite suppressing capabilities of all the macronutrients. When protein ends up in your stomach, it makes your stomach make these little hormones that tells your brain you're full. You don't need to keep eating, okay? Additionally, protein takes work to digest, more so than fats and carbohydrates, okay? So, one of the things is when you eat protein, okay? I'm not saying just eat protein, but if you will use a strategy of consuming protein each time you eat, you will find that you have more appetite suppression. They did a study where they took a bunch of overweight men and they said, we want you to use a scoop of whey protein powder, 20 grams of whey protein, theoretically 80 calories, 3 times a day. You don't change anything else. Eat how you want, but at each meal, you have to consume 1 scoop of whey protein. And they lost weight statistically significantly, even though the point of the study told them they had to consume 240 more calories, theoretically 240 more calories of protein a day. Well, that happened because the protein suppressed their appetite and they ate less other stuff. So, don't eat fats and carbs alone, eat them with protein. And I generally say eat the protein first. All right. The other thing, I'll jump down, no carbs at night, because that's a macronutrient, okay? When you eat carbohydrates at night, you dump insulin to react to that sugar load, okay? And insulin is a hormone that will hang around all night and make you store that energy as fat. And when your sugar levels drop low enough, it will actually slow your metabolic rate down while you sleep. Insulin competes with growth hormone. There are so many reasons not to eat carbs at night. It's unbelievable. If you gotta eat at night, make it a protein, make it a fat. Don't eat sugar, okay? Now, I'm not gonna dig into glycemic index right now, but basically you want your carbohydrates, that portion of your macronutrients, to come from foods that are low glycemic, meaning the sugar is not absorbed quickly. Generally, fruits and vegetables are fairly low glycemic. You got to be careful with fruits, especially your tropical fruits, melons, mangoes, bananas. Generally, if you don't have to peel it and can just eat it, it's pretty low glycemic. Or if it's a citrus fruit, it's pretty low glycemic. Generally, your vegetables, as long as they're not root vegetables, your starchy vegetables are low glycemic as well. So you want to have plenty of low glycemic carbohydrates and lots of fiber in your diet, but you got to watch the high glycemic stuff, and all your processed foods are terrible for you. All right, I think I had one other thing. This is a brief talk. I'm not trying to go, I've covered all of this in depth on wellness patients. You can dig in and make a difference. I outlined 2 people who've already done so within the last month, just from talking to me for a long time about a specific medical problem, wanting to become patients, and they have reversed clearly systemic disease based on what they've told me by rigidly following what I've discussed in my wellness patients. You guys can do the same thing. IF, intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is this notion that you don't eat all day long, okay? The simplest version is delay breakfast for a little while. I try to eat at 10 a.m. I have my coffee, some of my initial supplements in the morning. At 10 a.m. I eat breakfast. I'm going to stop eating at 8 p.m. at night. 10-hour eating window. If you have significant insulin resistance already, maybe shorten that to 8. It's got a lot of benefits. There's all kinds of scientific evidence out there that it improves insulin sensitivity. People lose weight. It's just a healthier way to eat. You shouldn't be eating the whole 15 hours a day that you're awake, okay? So shorten your eating window. If you have real problems with obesity and insulin resistance, you may consider a 36-hour fast, maybe 4 to 6 times a month. I did it for 4 months a year ago, every Saturday. I did lose a couple pounds of muscle mass, but you generally lose way more fat than muscle mass. I tolerated that pretty well. The last thing I had on here was tracking your weight. There's no better way to track weight than if you have access to a DEXA scan, because now you know lean muscle mass, body fat. In the last week, I got back from Cordova. I was weighing in at 154.9. Now, I couldn't lift weights for almost 8 or 9 days, so I probably lost a little muscle mass because all I was doing was push-ups and sit-ups and then doing my intervals. I got back to training because I got a little home gym, so I was lifting again. I was keeping up with my intervals. My diet changes a little bit when I'm home. My wife's a better cook than I cook for myself. And, I kind of probably failed a little bit and had some carbs at night a couple of times, which for me seems to immediately increase my weight. But ridiculous. I went from 154.8 to 160 in about a week. And I know I didn't put on 5 pounds of fat. There's issues like intestinal residue, things just didn't move through, and that was part of what was going on. I was defecating less than normal for me, because this morning I was back to 154.6. So you can't follow the fluctuations and freak out if your only way to follow your weight is a scale. You gotta look at it almost like the stock market. It's gonna do some of this, but you're following trends for longer. I think that if you do tape measures, that can be helpful, but again, it's gonna take time. I guess my point is, don't beat yourself up on day-to-day weight variation. The amount of water that you have in you can affect that. Inflammation, if you exercise hard and you're sore, you've got extra water on board. God, guys, there's nothing better that you can do on that energy out than those intervals that I've talked about. And I've covered them a little bit when I was in Cordova. I will try to go over the concept again of EPOC, which is post-exercise oxygen consumption that occurs with that really tough and difficult sprint interval training and high-intensity interval training. And I promise within the next few days, I'm going to film my family doing our sprint interval training session together, which we do 3 days a week, because otherwise my kids are way too sedentary through this whole COVID thing. Anyways, I guess that's what I've come up with. I hope Annie thinks I did a good job. You guys just try to do what you can, control that energy in, work on the timing, try to get out and walk around. Family right now is out walking dogs, so they're staying moved. I think they walked 3 miles yesterday. I'm stuck here doing this. I hope it was worthwhile. Thank you.